Dirty Bird podcast contains foul language and is not appropriate for young fledglings. Listener discretion is advised. Our intro music is brought to you by Ricky Pistone, aka Dick Piston. And our outro music is brought to you by the Sidewalk Slammers. Check them out wherever you get your music.
Are you looking for a podcast today with ornithology and humor you crave? Well, I know all these guys and it's birds they like. It's Dirty Bird, yeah, they're just a couple guys who really like birds. It's Dirty Bird, yeah, they're pretty dirty, but they really like birds.
Hello, and welcome to Dirty Bird Podcast, a podcast that's serious about birds, but nothing else. In each episode, me, Dr. John, tells you about a individual bird species. I go into their life history. I read all the scientific articles so you don't have to. Bring you all the cool, nerdy, birdie facts, and bring my dumb sense of humor with it, too. Very excited for this episode on the American robin. I'm recording right now from some woods that are directly behind my house in Buchanan, West Virginia. There's a pileated woodpecker calling, so hopefully that means we'll hear lots of wildlife. We might even hear some American robins. I hope so. But I am kind of just outside the city, so there is some noise. Every once in a while, a dog barks. There's also some planes flying overhead. There's one flying overhead right now. I hope that doesn't bother y'all. Hopefully we get tons of bird noise too to complement the human noise. It's nothing like the planes that used to fly over, when I record in Virginia Beach, those fighter jets. But I'm really excited for this episode. This is a listener-suggested episode. It actually comes from an Apple Podcast review. That's one way to get my attention for episodes, y'all, if you leave a Apple Podcast review suggesting one and give me a 5-star rating. So this user, their name was Annoyed with TikTok, and they left me a very nice 5-star review and suggested that I do one on the American robins. So thank you for that review, Annoyed with TikTok. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And thanks for everyone who suggests episodes to me. I promise you I have a queue that I am moving through, and I will cover your favorite bird. Also, a quick shout out to listener Phoenix, who won a free Dirty Bird t-shirt. In my Common Raven episode, I discussed how young ravens will play a game where they drop sticks in the air and dive down to catch it before it hits the ground. When I was talking about that, I was like, I remember I talked about this in another bird episode, but I couldn't exactly place it. Well, Phoenix remembered. She has a much better memory than me. Maybe she should host this podcast. But she remembered that another bird that plays that exact same game is the magnificent frigate bird, which I also did an episode on. So y'all check out that magnificent frigate bird episode, check out the Raven episode, and then also check out the Dirty Bird Podcast t-shirts, and you can have a t-shirt just like Phoenix. The link is on my Instagram, or type Linktree Dirty Bird Podcast into Google. Really, if you type in Dirty Bird Podcast into Google, kind of the first links you'll get will take you to my Linktree page and my Instagram page, all that. I have links that connect and will take you to the t-shirt page. As always, though, if you don't want to pay for a t-shirt, but you just want some free stickers, just send me a message, and I'll send you some free stickers. Finally, thanks to everyone who has reached out to me to message me about the show. I feel like I've gotten a lot of messages recently, and they're all awesome. It's like, I love the show. It's the suggested bird episodes, sometimes poking fun at my mispronunciations. Come on, guys. These Latin and scientific names are really hard. But just the fact that I know people are listening really just, warms my heart and keeps me making the show. And speaking about making the show, there may be a little bit of a break in the show. I have some big life changes coming. I'll be happy to announce them to everybody. But yeah, I might, be a month or so, maybe 2 until I get the next episode out. And speaking of people writing in, thank you for everybody that's been sending me the bird watches. So bird watch is a new segment I introduced where I will play somebody's voice memo of some kind of cool birding experience that they've had on the show. I've had some great ones so far, Jay Pogo, Cass, and then I'm really excited to play this bird watch. It's hilarious. It comes from listener Sabaz. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. That's what was in the email name, but yeah, let's listen to it. That's hilarious. We're feeding the house sparrows, but then ended up feeding a falcon. I'm sure that falcon was very happy with you for, not only feeding him, but also fattening up his prey for so long. Don't feel bad for that house sparrow people. They technically are an invasive species. I mean, okay, I feel bad a little bit for any animal that's dying, but at least it's going to feeding a native species, We actually got a lot of good bird sound here. I can hear a couple, birds chirping. I heard a towhee. Then I hear like some little just, cheeps. It's kind of cool too. I'm where I'm sitting. There's kind of a ravine below me, and then I can see the mountainside across from me. And I just saw a whole little herd of deer running, and I can only tell because I can see their white tails, and so I can't even hear them. I'm so far away, but I can see those white tails, and there were probably 5 or 6 of them running, and it's just kind of cool to look at and watch. Nice little recording spot. Maybe I'll make this a regular spot. So anyway, let me start in on this American Robin episode. So to describe American Robins, anybody in North America knows what they look like, but they are large songbirds. They have nice plump bodies. They have long tails, and they have long legs too. They are gray-black on their head, on the top of their body, and also over the top of their tail. Their head is often darker than the rest of the body, more a dark gray or even black. They also have a broken white ring around their eye. There's a lot of white spots mixed in on robins. There's some white on the throat. There's some spots on the wings and on the tail. And there's also white patch on the lower belly and on the tail, especially when they fly. If they fly over you, you'll see that white on the bottom. Males have a darker head and a more solid orange breast compared to females, but this can be difficult to determine unless they're side by side. And that orange breast, of course, is a very defining thing about the robin, is that they're kind of gray and drab, but they do have this orangey, pretty much pumpkin-colored breast. I actually wanted to start this episode talking about that breast with a Native American tale about how the robin got its red breast. In this tale, it's from it fanning the flames of a dying fire to save a man and his boy. But this episode, as I kept researching, it just kept getting longer and longer and longer. I usually try to keep these episodes around an hour, so I did cut that. I'm sorry. I like the Native American tales that I usually start with. I hope you guys do too. But yeah, that got axed. Tomahawked? Okay, never mind. The eastern population of American robins tend to have more white feathers on the outer rectrices of their wings. I'll talk a bit more about the subspecies and, how they differ a bit, but I won't go into painstaking detail about all the morphological differences. As we'll learn, this bird is really widespread, so there's a lot of regional differences. Their bill is bicolored, with the top being more black and the bottom being more yellow. They have a long and down-curved bill, perfectly adapted for pecking at the ground. American robins appear to have high rates of leucism, albinism, and melanism. I've talked about these different color variations on the show a lot, so for the sake of brevity, leucism means that the bird has some white, albinism means all white, and melanism means it's darker colored than usual. These mutations are usually less than 1% in wild bird populations, But a survey done in 1965 placed 8.2% of American robins having one of these mutations. Since birds rely on plumage characteristics for mating, often mutated wild individuals will never mate. The mutations may be common enough in American robins that they are just kind of used to it, though, because leucistic individuals have been observed successfully breeding in the wild. They're not totally tolerant of, genetic variation in the feather coloring, though. They do sexually select based on plumage, and their plumage is an indicator of reproductive success. A study conducted in Champaign, Illinois, at a Christmas tree farm between 2003 and 2004 found that females with darker breast plumage fledged more young. It also found that how much damage there is to tail feathers may be a strongly sexually selected for trait and an indicator of fitness in both sexes. Robins molt just once in the fall, and if they suffered a lot in the winter, their white spots on their tail will be particularly beat up and damaged, making them less attractive to mates. Females with less damaged tail spots tend to produce nestlings in better condition. Funnily enough, the better conditioned males with dark breasts and undamaged tail spots seem to be worse parents. They spend less time defending their nests and providing care to nestlings. This was theorized. They do this because they're spending more time seeking extra pair copulations. There's got to be some kind of parallel there to humans, the nicer looking males trying to step out a bit. But yeah, I'll just let you fill in the blanks. And again, this wasn't, proven. They did prove in this study that the males with better, plumage and that were selected for more were kind of worse parents. They weren't around the nest as much. But they didn't look into if they were copulating, doing extra pair copulations or anything like that. Really, the only bird you might confuse an American robin with, based on sight, is the eastern towhee. The east, and maybe the spotted towhee too. But anyway, towhees, the male does have similar black and orange coloration. However, as I talk about in my towhee episode, the towhee's colors are much more well defined, and its bill is short and black, not that long yellow bill that the robin has. The eye ring on the American robin is a dead giveaway too. The American robin is the state bird of Wisconsin, Connecticut, and Michigan. American robins are one of the most widespread North American birds, with their breeding range extending from the Caribbean and northern Mexico all the way up to southern Alaska and southern Canada. American robins are a migratory species, but across this wide range with different climates, there's a lot of different migratory variation. In the northern part of the range, robins appear to migrate earlier and farther than more southern populations. Robins captured in Denali National Park in Alaska were radio-collared, overwintering in Texas, about 4,500 kilometers away from their breeding grounds. They arrived on their overwintering grounds in September. This is compared to a Massachusetts robin that migrated 1,200 kilometers to South Carolina. However, it did not leave for migration until November. Sometimes the migrating robins get a little off track and end up in Western Europe or Greenland. Also, they sometimes pop up on Caribbean islands that they're not normally found on. And some populations don't migrate at all. 2 robins captured in Washington, D.C. spent an entire year within just 6 kilometers of their capture area. As far up as Minnesota, robin populations will remain throughout the winter and not migrate. You probably have colloquially heard that robins are a harbinger of spring. When you see robins again, spring is coming. But for most of the U.S., these robins are not, migratory. They're not leaving for the winter and then coming back in the spring. But you probably aren't seeing them as much in the winter because in the wintertime, they usually move away from your lawns or parks and instead move into forests where there's wild fruit. More on their winter feeding preferences later. American robins are found in urban, rural, and wild settings. And they're very tolerant of these urban settings. In a retrospective study conducted in 1974 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, comparing the bird diversity of an area that contained 5% ground cover by human-made structures versus 85% covered in human structures, like 70 years later after a lot of stuff had been built, They found that only American robins and catbirds were the two bird species that still remained in the area after that heavy urbanization. And really, I think about robins as like a suburban and urban bird. I'm kind of sitting out in the woods right now. And I know this is, robin habitat, especially in the winter. But a lot of times when I've been out in the woods and I hear or see robins, like it kind of throws me off. I'm like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be in my backyard or, in a park. Like you're not a wild bird. Like it's really weird when I'm out like backpacking and I'm miles and miles out in the forest and, there's a robin. And I'm like, dude, like I felt like I was removed from civilization. You're almost like pulling me back in, it's like my cell phone ringing when I'm out in the woods or something. So that common name robin, it's named after the European robin, which they resemble in their plumage. They have similar orange breast, but otherwise, like that's where the comparison ends because their body type is different, their behavior is different, and they're not really related at all. How robin became a pretty ubiquitous name for any red-breasted bird is a pretty cool story. So there's robins in India, in Australia that are also not related to the American or European robin. It's just really any bird with a red breast. Wherever the English went, they're like, oh, that's a robin. But it's kind of a cute story. In the 15th century in medieval England, it was popular to call animals by common human names. There's Will Wagtail, there's Philip Sparrow, there's Tom Tit, there's Jenny Wren. Robin was initially called Robert Redbreast, and Robert was then shortened down to Robin. And then, Robin Redbreast just became Robin. Their scientific name is Turdus migratorius. It's not a very exciting scientific name. Turdus is just Latin for thrush, and migratorius just refers to their migration behavior. I think maybe Carl Linnaeus was just running out of species names when he did Systema Natura and came to the American robin. So I said how the European robin is not really related to the American robin, but their actual counterpart in Europe is the European blackbird, a close relative of the American robin that has similar breeding and feeding behaviors and is also found in suburban and urban environments. Robins forage in loose flocks composing of 2 to 50 birds. You'll often see those flocks feeding on the ground in lawns or fields or up in the mid-canopy of trees and shrubs. And robins forage a lot. A sort of complicated study I read that tried to determine exactly how much foraging time a robin needs to spend in order to maintain its weight. So this study had estimated in the wild, accounting for energy expenditures such as flying, a robin must spend 336 minutes or just under 6 hours a day in foraging in order to maintain its body weight. Robins are pretty unmistakable when foraging on the ground. They do this very distinctive short run, then stand upright and look around, might peck down, might grab a worm. Like most birds, American robin nestlings are fed almost entirely invertebrates. They need lots of protein in order to rapidly grow. But nestlings may begin to receive fruit once they get close to fledging. Adults eat a mixed diet of fruit and invertebrates. Their diet changes with the seasons. They'll eat mostly invertebrates in the spring, a mixture of fruit and invertebrates in the summer, and mostly just fruit in the fall and winter when bugs are harder to find. They eat a variety of invertebrates from arthropod creepy crawly bugs to worms to mollusks like snails. Everyone knows how robins like to eat worms, and the way they find them is kind of cool. They hunt for worms using sight, looking for worms either at or just below the surface. They usually cock their heads to scan the ground with one eye, while keeping the other eye pointed up towards the sky, scanning for predators. In the winter, their diet can make up between 56 and 79% fruit, but they can't survive on just fruit alone. An experiment conducted in 1989 was abandoned after 4 days, when robins lost 10 to 15% of their body mass on a fruit-only diet. Robin guts handle insects and fruit differently. If you remember from my cedar waxwing episode, fruit-eating birds tend to have a feeding strategy to eat a lot fast and then just shit it out. This is because fruit is pretty hard to digest and birds can't afford all that extra weight sitting in their system. So they just extract what sugars they can and then just shit it out and fly away and eat some more. This isn't true for all birds. Check out my oil bird episode to learn more about that. When feeding on insects, experiments have shown robin guts transit times are slower than when feeding on fruit, meaning robin guts are able to sense the high protein content of a bug diet and slow their digestion down in order to pull out nutrients. While when eating high sugary foods like fruits or berries, robin guts move much faster. This has to do with signals from hormones and also, the nervous tissue, but also from the direct laxative effect that, the fruit has. Anyone who drinks a bunch of prune juice can tell you about that. But another potential reason for the laxative effect of fruit on robins is that they are unable to digest sucrose. Fruits contain 3 main types of sugar: glucose, fructose, and sucrose. Sucrose is basically a giant sugar molecule that breaks down into fructose and glucose. Some bird species lack sucrase, which is the enzyme that breaks sucrose apart, and therefore cannot digest sucrose. Also, fructose is much more slowly digested by birds than glucose and is a less energy efficient meal. I think I talk about this a lot in my waxwing episode. Studies where robins are presented with various mixtures of standalone of these sugars and also, mixtures of the 2 types or 3 types of sugars shows that robins prefer glucose-only solutions to a glucose-fructose mixture. But they seem to have trouble differentiating fructose-only solutions from mixtures that contain glucose, suggesting that their sugar sense of taste relies on some glucose being present. When robins eat sucrose, they develop severe diarrhea and actually learn to avoid fruits that contain it. If something makes your belly hurt, you're unlikely to eat it again. Sucrose has actually been proposed as a potential additive to help protect crops from being eaten by robins and also being eaten by European starlings, who also apparently can't digest sucrose. American robins are sometimes in competition with waxwings for fruit during the winter. There's an account from 1986 in St. Cloud, Minnesota, where one bold robin fended off 15 cedar waxwings from a crabapple tree. This occurred in April, and it's not clear if the robin was defending the small, newly grown apples from the waxwings, or it was just defending a potential nesting location. But over the course of several days, the robin fought off more waxwing invaders and also chased off a blue jay and a purple finch. Eventually, when a flock of 30 waxwings landed and fed on the tree, the robin realized he was outnumbered and gave up the onslaught. Like waxwings, robins sometimes eat fermented fruit and become drunk. Maybe that feisty robin was just drunk on some apple cider and protecting his booze supply from the waxwings. As I've learned with researching lots of birds, sometimes more exotic foods than berries and bugs come on the menu. Adults have been known to sometimes be carnivores. They have been observed in the wintertime plucking small fish out of the water, particularly when the water is mostly frozen and the fish are restricted to small ponds of unfrozen water. There's several documented encounters of American robins flying off with snakes, sometimes ones that are even longer than their body size. In 2006 in Jefferson County, Kentucky, 2 juvenile robins were observed chasing down and cooperatively killing and then eating a 5-line skink. In the Pacific Northwest, American robins seem to take advantage of the many amphibians found there. In 2015 in Washington State Park, a robin preyed on a lungless salamander, and in 2022 an American robin was observed killing and eating a Pacific tree frog on San Juan Island in Washington. Small mammals aren't off the menu either. There's a record from the Canadian Naturalist in 1977 of an American robin killing and eating a shrew. Snakes and shrews have also been observed being fed to nestlings by robins. I mean, meat has a lot of protein, and those nestlings need to grow. I found an account from the Urban Naturalist in 2019 that described a rare account of robins feeding their nestlings the carcass of another bird. This occurred in 2018 on the campus of Indiana University, where the male brought his 6-day-old nestlings the carcass of an unknown bird nestling. When nestlings are this young, they can't really peck at food. They mostly just swallow it whole. And so one of the 2 nestlings attempted to swallow the head of this dead nestling while the other tried to swallow its leg. This was, of course, unsuccessful, and the observer actually retrieved the carcass from the mouths of the seemingly choking nestlings. It's unknown how the male got this carcass. I really doubt it went and raided the nest of another bird and stole it. Probably it just was feeding on the ground, looking for worms or bugs, and came across this nestling that had fallen out of a nest, and decided, oh, this is meat. I'll take it to my babies. All right, so that's the feeding of American robins. Let's talk about their breeding. Despite that study that I mentioned earlier, theorizing that the more handsome male robins were worse parents because they were trying to step out on their wives, most observational studies conclude that robin pairs have high mate fidelity during the nesting season, staying together through the whole breeding season. I did not find any studies like I found in some previous episodes where they actually went and genetically tested the eggs and the young to, see how much extra pair paternity happened. Pairs may divorce if they are unsuccessful at breeding. Interesting, though, they seem to pick a new breeding partner each breeding season, even though they have high site fidelity, meaning they tend to return to the same general area to breed year after year. So even though, in a season, they'll stay together through the whole season, like they are monogamous, the next year when they come back, even though they're seeing each other, they're in the same area, they're like, nah, I like the neighbor a little bit. Let me take him for a spin. Their breeding season usually extends from early April to mid-August. There's lots of variation across the range of American robins on when they time their breeding. They nest later in colder climates and also stop their breeding earlier. By July, the gonads of male and female robins in British Columbia are inactive. I've talked about this on the show before, but birds have an interesting quirk where if they are not in a breeding cycle, their testes or ovaries will shrink dramatically. Basically, as flying creatures, they can't afford any extra weight, and balls and ovaries are extra weight. And that weight that they lose can be significant. Some record testes measurements of American robin males in peak breeding season reach up to 1 gram in weight, and females' ovaries can weigh over 7 grams. The robin's average weight is around 7 to 80 grams. So, an ovary that's a tenth of your body weight, that's huge. As far as their courtship goes, males sing to display their fitness and to attract a female. More about these songs a little later. When a female is interested, males will raise and spread their tails and also inflate their throats to reveal white throat stripes that are normally hidden. You can see a little bit of them, but they really flare them out when they're doing their courtship ritual. They also will spread and shake their wings. If a female likes what she sees, she will pair up with him for the season. Females and males will maintain that pair bond by doing a display where they will approach each other with their bills held open and then touch their bills together, sort of like a little American robin kiss. Aww. The female chooses the nesting site. She usually will build their nest in a low, hidden branch of a tree or shrub. They're highly versatile in what types of trees and shrubs they use, and it varies by local conditions. In some areas, they prefer conifers, while in others, it's deciduous trees. And as we'll see, they can do 1 to 3 broods, so sometimes they'll switch up the site, depending on if there's only conifers with needles early in the season, and then, the trees get all their leaves, and they might switch up and go to the deciduous trees. So they're just very adaptable. They've also been known to nest on human-built structures like gutters, eaves, and light fixtures. And they've also been known to build nests on cliffs or directly on buildings, similar to how doves do, in areas where there really aren't trees or shrubs. And in extreme environments where there are no trees and shrubs, like big crop fields or barren islands, American robins will still nest there, and they've actually been documented nesting on the ground. They'll also do this on islands that have no mammalian predators because, they don't need to worry about being up in a tree and away from a hungry raccoon. This isn't only in extreme environments, though. In 2018 to 2020 in Champaign County, Illinois, 24 robin nests were found nested directly on the ground, despite there being plenty of trees and shrubs around and also certainly lots of hungry mammalian predators that would love to eat those nests. Their nests appear to do just as well as nests that were located above the ground. So if you see a robin nest on the ground, it doesn't necessarily mean it fell out of a tree. It might be best to just, leave it be. Their nest is bulky and cup-shaped. It's composed of twigs, leaves, and then they are all sealed together with mud. This mud is actually gathered from worm casings, from the worms that they eat, making it extra sticky and great for holding things together. It's honestly like a little adobe hut nest. I found one once in my yard, like I was trimming a tree that was pretty much up against the house. It was a magnolia tree that was pretty much scraping up against the house. So I had to cut it. And as I was cutting it, there was a robin nest on it. And it really was like a solid chunk, it definitely weighed a couple pounds, maybe as much as 5 pounds. I don't know, because it was just mud, hard packed in, woven, and that thing was solid, compared to most bird nests, they're just like a little woven cup of twigs and stuff. No, this is a serious home. There are multiple accounts of American robins nesting late into autumn and even the winter, with nesting accounts dating into September, October, and even a case of a November nester in 1964 in West Virginia. A lot of these records come from suburban and urban areas, some of the nests even being built on human structures. The ambient heat retained in concrete environments might be the reason why these robins were able to nest so late. There's a couple accounts of robins co-nesting together with gray catbirds. Check out my gray catbird episode to hear more specifics about that. As I talk about in that episode, the relationship of gray catbirds and robins is complicated. Sometimes they get along and nest together. Other times they brood parasitize each other. There's also accounts of co-nesting with northern cardinals, and even one account of a seemingly confused northern cardinal feeding American robin nestlings. I can't help but anthropomorphize, with these co-nesting accounts between species. But it's almost like these birds are in like a poly relationship. The females will incubate each other's eggs, and all parents will share in feeding each other's young. It's really bizarre. The American robin's relationship with other cup nesting bird species is not always harmonious, though. On the campus of Wayland Baptist University in Hale County, Texas in 2014, a pair of Eurasian collared doves, which are an invasive species, took over an American robin nest, kicking the robin parents out after all their hard work. Luckily, it doesn't seem like the American robins had laid any eggs yet at that time. American robin couples are territorial about their nesting site and will chase away other robins and other bird species. I guess except the occasional catbird or cardinal that they'll let, just lay your eggs in here. Come on, we'll raise them all together. They lay anywhere from 1 to 5 eggs, but usually it's 2 to 4 eggs. And robin eggs are very distinctive in their color. There's even, paints that are called, robin egg blue. They are blue-green eggs, very distinctive, very pretty. Oh, some crows flying over. When you see robin eggs on the ground or their shell fragments, it's hard not to pick them up and just admire them. It's like a piece of turquoise. I just want to take a little diversion to talk about bird eggshell coloration and about robin's eggs. Eggshell coloration in birds comes down to 2 pigments: biliverdin, that causes the green and blue hues, and protoporphyrin 9, which causes brown and red hues. The evolution of egg color in birds is a whole nother conversation. There's brood parasites, predators, and brooding signals to mom and dad that factor into how eggs, evolve their colors. And while the blue eggs of robins seem really conspicuous when you find them on the ground, their blue-green coloration is actually a form of camouflage because it matches the ambient light. As light filters down through tree leaves, it kind of takes on a green-blue ambient hue, which blends in with the eggs. Thought I heard a raven there. I wonder if these crows are chasing a raven. Robins incubate their eggs for 9 to 14 days before the eggs hatch. The mother does all the incubation. Apparently, American robins will sometimes delay the start of incubation in order to time their eggs hatching to increase survival. It's pretty common for birds to do something called early nest incubation, where they will start incubating the first or second egg laid before they have laid that full clutch of eggs. This causes these eggs to develop faster and hatch sooner than the eggs that are laid later and incubated later. And it's thought to help with nest survival because nestlings are less likely to be preyed upon than eggs. However, in this instance, American robins did something called delayed incubation. On that same Christmas tree farm in Champaign, Illinois, from 2003 to 2004 that I talked about earlier, about 20% of the nesting robin population there would not begin incubation until 1 to 4 days after laying a fall clutch. The adaptive reason for this could be that it allows mother a few extra days to feed and fatten up before the rigors of raising nestlings, or they could purposely be delaying hatching to time with when food is most available and they will be able to keep up with those hungry chicks. Once the eggs hatch and they're feeding the nestlings, those nestlings are also pooping, and the parents will carry their fecal sacs away from the nest and drop them so predators don't locate the nest by the young's droppings. Fecal sacs are basically like natural diapers for birds. Both parents feed the nestlings and carry away the fecal sacs, and also both defend the nest from predators. But the mother exclusively incubates the eggs and nestlings until they are able to thermoregulate for themselves. The nestlings fledge after 9 to 16 days. This is right around most songbird species that take about 2 weeks to fledge. And after leaving the nest, fledglings will stay with their parents for about 2 weeks. This is an important time for the fledglings to learn to forage for themselves, while their parents continue to provide them with supplemental feedings in order to keep them alive while they learn. I always love this part of bird breeding behavior. A lot of bird species do this, continuing to feed their young while they learn how to survive on their own. It just reminds me of parents, sending their kids some money while they're in college or starting their first real job. The juveniles may rely a bit more heavily on fruit in their diets. Some studies of wild robin stomachs found higher fruit content in juveniles versus adults. This makes sense because fruit can't really run away the way that bugs can, and may be easier for inexperienced juveniles to eat. Robins do generally produce 2 broods in a season, one in early spring and one in the summer. They have been documented doing a 3rd brood too, and they will re-nest if they lose one brood early on. During the winter, robins will form huge roosting flocks that number in the hundreds to thousands. They tend to return to the same roost locations in sheltered trees night after night. In Oklahoma, weather radar was used to monitor populations of American robins and found one roosting flock that was estimated to number at 1.5 million. That is crazy. And that must have been so loud if you walked in the trees where those robins were roosting. So let's talk about the different sounds that robins make. Robins are very prolific singers. They often make up a significant part of the morning chorus in suburban and urban areas. They may sing throughout the day and also contribute a lot to the evening chorus. Rarely do you hear them singing at night. For people who hate waking up to noisy bird song, I know it's terrible, right? I'd much rather hear a lawnmower. Robins singing in urban areas can be particularly bothersome because robins in urban areas initiate the dawn chorus earlier than those in rural areas. This is likely due to light pollution that triggers robins into thinking the dawn is coming earlier. Misty and foggy days trap artificial light closer to the ground and cause urban robins to start their song particularly early. Robins are common birds, but they really do have an intricate and beautiful song. I think we just take it for granted in North America because we hear it all the time. It's a string of somewhat repeated syllables, often described as sounding like cheerily, cheer up, cheerily, cheer up. Virtually all members of the thrush family are very distinguished singers. This is because thrushes have a distinctive structure within their syrinx, which is like the larynx or voice box in humans. That's the raven. I guess he chased the crows off. Their syrinx has an elongated structure called a turdine thumb that protrudes from the syrinx and helps them further modulate their song. They may change how fast they sing their song depending on the time of day, usually singing faster at dawn. And they give a variety of different alarm calls too. Observations have recognized that for ground predators, robins tend to give a yeep or chuck alarm call. They also give a Seet call, similar to the high-pitched call of a cedar waxwing, to alert of aerial predators like hawks. Other animals, not just birds, may also recognize and respond to their alarm calls. Playback experiments with gray squirrels showed that they responded similarly to robin alarm calls as they would from alarm calls from other squirrels, suggesting gray squirrels have learned the robin alarm calls may signify a predator. American robins are prone to all the usual bird nest predators like snakes, tree-climbing mammals, and egg and nestling-stealing birds like jays, crows, and hawks. While robins are potential targets for brood parasitism from the brown cowbird, a bird that will lay eggs in other birds' nests and leave all the work of parenting to them, robins appear to be pretty adept at recognizing and removing cowbird eggs from their nest. Experiments using artificial eggs or different sizes and colors indicate that robins identify and reject cowbird eggs, mainly based on their size, since cowbird eggs are smaller than robin eggs. Cowbird eggs also tend to be white with brown spots, and robins seem to favor eggs that are immaculate blue-green, rejecting eggs with brown spots or white coloring more often than that immaculate beautiful turquoise color. This same study, which was conducted in Boulder, Colorado between 2000 and 2002, also looked at differences in rejection behavior of robins at low and high altitudes. Low altitude robins encounter cowbirds more often and appear to be better at identifying and rejecting their eggs. They also respond more aggressively than high altitude robins when models of cowbirds are brought near their nest. This suggests that different populations of robins are able to learn and adapt to specific threats that they encounter. Their nest success rate can vary a lot with location and year-by-year climatic variations. In some areas, egg to fledgling survival can be as low as 37 to 50%. This seems to be the norm across most of their range, with 45 to 50% egg survival popping up in a lot of places. There are some enclaves where robins do really well, though, like around Vancouver, Canada, where egg to fledgling survival was 86.6%. It's a wash on whether urban robins are more successful at nesting than rural robins. Urban environments have less predators and increased ambient heat levels, which may help survival, but they also have us pesky humans around with our toxic chemicals, cats and dogs, and windows that can kill the parents from collisions. Some studies have found urban nests doing better in comparison to nearby rural areas, while others have found just the opposite. Again, this bird is super widespread and in a variety of environments, so there's just a lot of variations. And, robins just have a lot of different behavioral adaptations depending on where they are. So I thought this is really cool. All of us in our little local microhabitat of our backyard, our robins probably have some unique behaviors, and there's areas for research there. Adult bird predators include the usual songbird predators, hawks, and the occasional snake. However, the real killer of these ground-feeding birds is domestic cats. As I've said on the show a million times, outdoor cats should not be a thing. Most wild birds have feather mites, but sometimes in robins these mites can get out of control. One mite called Nemidocoptus mutans can cause a particularly nasty condition called scaly legs, where the mites burrow into the skin of the bird's legs, causing really itchy and painful looking lesions. Several outbreaks of this parasite in robins have been documented in Oklahoma, Georgia, and Florida in the 90s. Since robins feed a lot on the ground and on insects, especially on lawns and suburban environments, they are potentially at risk for exposure to herbicides and insecticides. One notorious insecticide called chloropyrifos was known to decrease productivity and kill a wide variety of birds, including American robins in both laboratory and wild conditions, but fortunately this insecticide was banned in the US in 2021. Luckily, 2 other insecticides called diazinon and acephate, which can be found in many products on the shelf today, seem to not cross over the blood-brain barrier in robins, based on a study conducted in 1990 in Quebec. Similarly, DDT, a notorious insecticide that is toxic to birds and was banned in the 70s, doesn't seem to affect modern robins much. A few studies conducted in the late 90s in Canada found that although DDT levels are still present in soil in orchards, and robins in these orchards had detectable DDT levels in their bodies, they did not appear to have any negative effects on their reproduction. Luckily, even though these chemicals seem to stick around in detectable levels for a long time, they appear to have dissipated enough in the environment to not be harmful. Well, to robins at least. Also, as ground-feeding birds, robins seem to be very prone to intestinal parasites. Most intestinal parasites are transmitted by fecal-oral transmission, and when you're pecking at the ground, robins are at risk for ingesting feces that are on that ground and ingesting parasite eggs or segments that are in those feces. An exhaustive study conducted by the University of Notre Dame in 1976 listed every intestinal parasite ever identified in American robins in the literature, totaling at 46 different species. Avian malaria affects and sometimes kills American robins. I found 2 accounts in 1979 from the Bronx Zoo in New York where American robins died from avian malaria. And American robins appear to be significant vectors for and victims of West Nile virus. In the eastern U.S., American robins make up between 25% and 71% of all the blood meals of West Nile virus vector mosquito species. These poor birds are just getting eaten up by mosquitoes. They appear to be pretty prone to infection by West Nile virus, ranking 9 out of a list of 53 most competent West Nile virus host species. Lawns and parks create ideal habitat for American robins and bring them in close proximity to humans, making them a possible vector of West Nile virus transmission from robins to humans. And just so you know, it's not like the robin is giving it directly to the human. It's the mosquito bites the robin that is infected with West Nile virus. The mosquito becomes infected with West Nile virus. The mosquito bites a human, and that's how the human gets it. So don't blame the robins. In the mid-Atlantic region of the U.S., American robins are estimated to be responsible for 35 to 86% of West Nile virus infected mosquitoes. Another concern is that robins are long-distance migrants, so they can potentially spread West Nile virus far and wide. Particularly concerning is that as the climate warms and mosquitoes who carry West Nile virus are able to move further and further north, that robins in these northern latitudes may be a source of West Nile virus infection to those mosquitoes, who can then spread it to humans and other animals. There has been some promising ongoing work into developing vaccines for West Nile virus that can be orally administered to wild birds. And there has been some promising results to robins. It's just they had to give them intramuscularly, which obviously you can't go out and, administer intramuscular vaccines to all the wild robins. Most robins in the wild live for about 6 years, but the oldest banded wild individual was 13 years and 11 months old. American robins in captivity can live for much longer, but seem to be prone to some of the same issues that impact humans in their older years, particularly cancer. In 2018, a 15-year-old pet robin in Mexico was diagnosed with a mixed thymoma, which is a cancer of an immune organ called the thymus that's in the front of the neck in both birds and humans. Wild robins sometimes get cancers too. In 1996 in DuPage County, Illinois, a robin was brought to a wildlife rehabilitation center after its wing had been injured by a domestic cat. It was found to have a swelling on its jawbone, and when that swelling was sampled, it revealed an osteosarcoma, a type of bone tumor. The bird unfortunately deteriorated over the next 3 weeks and was euthanized. The American robin population appears to be doing pretty well at about 370 million breeding individuals. As of the 2019 Partners in Flight database, this makes robins the most populous bird in North America. Their population is stable or even slightly increasing. All right, folks, we're almost done with the robin episode. Thanks for hanging in there. Let's finish up with evolutionary history. So, our American robin, Turdus migratorius, is appropriately in the family Turdidae, which is the true thrush family, composed of 17 to 21 different genuses. I can't believe I haven't made a turd joke yet in this episode. I breezed right over Turdus migratorius and was just like, yeah, oh yeah, Turdus, turd. God. Yeah, I'm 5 years old. Of these, Turdus, is by far the largest genus. It makes up half of all the species within the Turdidae, the true thrush family. You'll notice I said 17 to 21 different genuses in this family. Figuring out the evolutionary history of the true thrushes is really complicated because these birds are surprisingly strong flyers and are able to disperse over oceans. So over the years, there's been a lot of conflicting studies that will, separate out and add and subtract different genuses from Turdidae, and then also change up the evolutionary history. What I bring you guys is from a study. There was a 2019, a 2021, and then also a 2024 study that went into some of the mitochondrial DNA and everything like that. And so I'm bringing you the most up-to-date what we think happened to the thrushes. So there were a lot of different colonization events for thrushes going to new continents, and then also them being such strong flyers, they turned around and flew back and recolonized too, which just made everything more complicated. And of course, I'll preface this, I am not an ornithologist. I'm just a crazy medical doctor that likes birds and likes to sit in the woods and talk about birds for you people. So, let me know if something's wrong and I will correct it. But the family Turdidae appears to have come into its own around 22 million years ago, as that's when it appears to have separated from Oenanthe, also known as the wheat ears, which are a bird in the flycatcher family. And the flycatchers seem to be kind of the closest relatives to the true thrushes. The Turdus genus has its roots in the late Miocene around 9.3 million years ago. This was a period of warming, and the Turdus genus may have evolved as early thrushes began exploiting new environments, opened up from retreating glaciers, and also savanna formation in Africa. They likely first evolved in Eurasia, specifically the Palearctic realm, which is basically the whole northern part of Europe and Asia. And specifically within this, East Asia seems to be the origin of Turdus. Those blue-green eggs appear to be an ancestral trait of the Turdus genus, with the most basal member of the genus, the Chinese thrush, having blue-gray robin-like eggs. So it's likely that the common ancestor had those blue-green eggs too. The first major radiation of the Turdus genus occurred around 7.2 million years ago, when a Turdus common ancestor made it to Africa and began to speciate. This coincides with northern Africa becoming more arid and desert-like, producing both a geological barrier to separate populations and also more niches for speciation. Around 5.3 million years ago, the New World was colonized. It used to be thought that there were multiple colonization events from the Old World to the New, but more recent genomic research suggests a single colonization event. And it appears that the Caribbean islands were first colonized via transatlantic flight from thrushes. This is kind of similar to Columbus, like when he crossed the Atlantic, he first landed in Hispaniola. He landed in the Caribbean islands. And this is kind of similar to the thrushes. When they first migrated over, they landed in the Caribbean islands, and they're like, oh man, this is paradise. This is awesome. Unlike Columbus, though, the thrushes that colonized the Caribbean likely came from Africa. It's really a remarkable event. They flew against the prevailing wind and currents. It's such an unlikely event, actually, that there must have been some fluke storm system that aided them. There's no other songbirds that colonized America this way. As we've talked about countless times in the show, most birds make their way to America via the Bering Land Bridge. That's Russia to Alaska. But thrushes made it to the Americas from Africa to the Caribbean. After speciating the Americas, thrushes then turned around and actually went back to Europe and Africa, this time going with the wind and currents. It suggested that there were actually 4 different dispersal events back to the Old World, one of these producing the blackbird that is so ubiquitous across Europe today. Turdus quickly speciated within the New World and spread from the Caribbean to Mesoamerica, and then to North and South America. This is around the time that the Panama Land Bridge was forming, so all those connecting islands and land masses just aided their dispersal. Interestingly, our American robin is the only Turdus bird in North America. Its closest relative is the rufous collared thrush, which resides in the Mesoamerican countries of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, and also makes its way into southern Mexico too. So I guess technically it's North American. The common ancestor of the rufous collared thrush and the American robin likely came over to the mainland from the Caribbean within just a few 100,000 years or 1 million years of that mass colonization event from Africa around 5 million years ago. However, it appears it wasn't until much more recently that the American robin evolved, within the last 1 million years and maybe as recently as 600,000 years ago. One of the reasons for this is that North America may have been not a very hospitable place for the ground-feeding thrush during many periods of glaciation. It wasn't until there was a glacial retreat and the ground was uncovered from ice that new niches opened up for the American robin to exploit. Given the wide range of the American robin, it's not surprising that there are subspecies, and there are actually 7 recognized subspecies of American robin. The largest one is Turdus migratorius, which basically makes up most of Canada and the northern U.S. from Virginia up, excluding the west coast. The second is Nigridius, which is a eastern Canada coastal specialist, located around the coast of Quebec, Newfoundland, and Labrador. A third, called Achurusterus, is found around the Gulf Coast of Florida and goes up into western Virginia. Carinus is another one. It makes up the northern part of the west coast from Alaska, British Columbia, down to Oregon. While another subspecies, there's another one, Philipsi, which is the northern Mexico American robin. And finally, we have Turdus migratorius confinis, that breeds only above 3,000 feet in the Sierra de Laguna Mountains in Baja California. And this robin looks weird. It's like really pale. Its bill is all yellow. There's arguments that it actually should be a species in its own right. One final note on the subspecies. I sometimes talk on the show about how whether something is a species or subspecies kind of comes down to whether you're a lumper or a splitter. So in general terms, lumpers tend to be on the side of less breakdown of populations, while splitters like to use every little morphological and genetic difference to make their argument for new species or subspecies. It doesn't all come down to genetics, though. One way that the splitters sort of win with the subspecies of American robins is the fact that different subspecies have their own specific gutworm parasites of the genus Luhea. The Western American robin subspecies have a particular gut parasite called Luhea adluhea, while the Mexican American robin, that Philipsi, has a parasite species appropriately called Luhea azteca. And that's all I have about the American robin. Like I said, there was some stuff I had to kind of skip over for brevity's sake. If I did not talk about your favorite robin fact, please let me know. Send me a bird watch, send me a message, let me know if you want free stickers. Thank you for listening. And as always, stay dirty, fellow birdies.
Dirty Bird Podcast is brought to you by me, John, with my rotating panel of guests and co-hosts. Thanks for being on the show, everybody. The Dirty Bird theme song is by Ricky Pistone. Check out his groovy and hilarious music videos on YouTube. The outro music you're listening to right now is a song New York Redneck by the Sidewalk Slammers. Check them out wherever you get your music. The Dirty Bird Podcast logo is by the very talented TJ Ranoski. And of course, a shout out to my beautiful wife, Lauren, who created my original logo. Check out the show notes for this episode for a full list of credits for any bird calls or sounds used in the episode. Thanks for listening.
At the track, drive into Brooklyn, ain't never coming back. Tim's on the ground in the concrete jungle. I might get into a little
cowboy.